Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Stephanie and the team of the Center of Cooperative Media and everyone that has worked to make possible the Collaborative Journalism Summit this year. I am deeply honored and excited to introduce you to this year's key speaker, Marina Walker Guevara. I want to start with a very short story. I moved to the US 7 years ago, and Marina was the first person who replied one of my emails and welcomed me to meet the journalists and the work that they were doing at ICIJ. And I felt like so welcome from day one that I was able to meet people. And since then, I keep crossing paths with Marina and learning from her in every possible way, from one-on-one conversations to hearing her when she speaks in panels, what she shares on Twitter, and also just like how she communicates. So I just want to invite you to enjoy the generosity of someone that is so smart, so disciplined, so professional, and just like so thoughtful, and is changing and has created a big change in how we do journalism around the world. In the official presentation, I want to say Marina Walker Guevara is the Pulitzer Center Executive Director. Before joining the center, she was Deputy Director at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, where she managed two of the largest collaborations in history in journalism, the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, that involve hundreds of journalists that use technology. And I want to add to that, thought was a learning process for journalists to embrace that technology too, to unravel stories of public interest from terabytes of leaked financial data. And to that, I also want to share that teaches journalists of how to understand these complex financial data. She was instrumental in developing a model of large-scale collaboration. She has worked very hard to persuade reporters who used to be competitors to work together, and I think also to not only fall in love of working together, but just recognizing how important and changing it is. I will give Marina the time very soon, but I just want to invite everyone to share your questions and in the Q&A section of Zoom. As she is speaking, we will start looking at them. And if anyone is more comfortable writing your questions in Spanish, feel free to do it. Apologize, I cannot offer that in another language, but we are doing our best. So with that, Marina, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Mago. There is like really nobody I would rather share this morning with than you. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm so glad to be here today with this vibrant and resilient community of journalists and innovators. Thank you so much to Stephanie. Thank you to the Center for Cooperative Media for bringing us together, for your fellowship, for your leadership, so we can reflect on our craft this morning. Collaboration, as Mago says, has anchored my experience and my career in journalism and allowed me to do things that I basically never thought were possible. And speaking of impossible ventures, I would like to share with you and start this morning with an anecdote from another discipline that has resonated deeply with me as I reflect on our achievements and challenges in journalism. On April 10, 2019, astronomers at the Harvard Center for Astrophysics declared at a press conference, "We have seen what we thought was unseeable." They were referring to the first ever photograph of a black hole, something that until that point had been considered impossible because to accomplish that, the scientists would have needed a telescope the size of the Earth. So instead, 200 scientists, joined forces and created a network of synchronized radio telescopes that were set to focus on the same object at the same time and act as a giant virtual telescope. So the more telescopes involved, the sharper the image. As the New York Times put it at the time, the scientists had to adjust the telescopes to work together. They had to get the timing right. They had to hope that the weather would cooperate in multiple places at the same time. Imagine that. And yes, they had to hope that nothing broke in the process. It sounded crazy, but it worked. So now let's think about journalism and how that kind of cooperation and ingenuity grounded in trust and a little bit of crazy has allowed us to overcome our limitations, break new ground, and tackle the stories that we thought would be impossible to do. Go no further than the current global pandemic of the past 2 years. Whether by choice or by force, the stuck-at-home journalists have found bold and creative ways to cooperate across newsrooms and borders, discovering in the process a new sense of journalistic solidarity. We use mapping and other digital tools to overcome mobility restrictions. We cooperated with other disciplines, scientists, artists, educators, to get the context and the nuance that makes a story not only compelling, but truly relevant to the communities most affected. As we gather here today, dozens of our colleagues are cooperating across newsrooms and borders, including Ukrainian and Russian journalists working hand in hand to track Russian oligarch assets, to unravel global networks of propaganda and disinformation, and to document war crimes. So when humankind is at its lowest, as it sometimes has felt in the past few weeks and months, journalists who ground their practice in collaboration are best positioned to tell the crucial stories of our time. They know that these stories transcend us. They transcend our competitive instincts, our newsroom politics, and yes, our own egos. So they use the technology in smart ways and they band together. They band together for the sake of truth, to bear witness together, and to get a sharper image, just like those scientists chasing the black holes, a sharper image of the crisis that will shape not only our lives today, but the lives of generations to come. So maybe this is a good moment to pause and appreciate what a radical proposition collaboration is in the context of journalism. Just think about all the things that we had to unlearn in order to put radical sharing at the center of our reporting. For how long journalism's whole ethos revolved around hoarding information, scooping others, and getting ahead alone. The thing is, the world got complicated, interconnected, and increasingly more dangerous. And so did the stories that the lone wolf reporter was trying to tackle in glorified isolation. How do you follow the money across dozens of tax havens jurisdictions where secrecy and opaqueness are protected by law? How do you track commodities from the depths of the rainforest in the Amazon to the global markets, to luxury fashion and cars in the US? How do you investigate algorithms that are developed in Silicon Valley, maybe in Shanghai, but the data they are trained on is labeled in the Philippines and is used to develop models and then are deployed in countries around the world? We journalists realized that we needed our own network to investigate these complex networks and systems. I was fortunate to be part of one of the first attempts at organized journalistic collaboration. Most people learned about the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists when we published the Panama Papers in 2016. And they were a little surprised to learn that the network had been around since 1998. Building this network indeed took several years of trial and error, and learning our own methods, tinkering with technology, and crucially, learning to trust one another. So here's a definition of trust that resonates with me. Trust is the confidence, or trust is confidence in the face of risk that the other person will do the right thing. Trust is confidence in the face of risk that the other person will do the right thing. We need to be certain in the face of risk or pressure that our collaborators will do the right thing. Observe the embargo, protect the sources, give appropriate credit, follow our security protocols, and of course, do their share of the work. Ultimately, trust is the foundational stone that determines whether a collaboration thrives or crumbles. There is no digital tool or coordination strategy that can overcome a lack of trust. So developing that deep trust that is anchored in shared values involves, at the very beginning, picking your partner's right. My advice based on my own mistakes and successes, look at the whole person, not only the journalistic skills or the track record in journalism. Self-awareness, humility, an ability to put oneself in somebody else's shoes, optimism. These are all invaluable traits that can help you overcome the most challenging moments in a collaboration. So make sure that you have enough of those qualities in your newsrooms and in your collaborations. In other words, as my friend Don Garcia says, no brilliant jerks. And I would add, life is too short. Also, we don't collaborate just out of the goodness of our heart. We do it for the sake of the story and the audience. We put the story at the center of all of our efforts. Sharing the Panama Papers with 376 other journalists around the world was a decision both practical and philosophical. Technology was only going to help us so much. We needed local knowledge, we needed nuance, and we needed context to interpret the data that only our colleagues in places as disparate as Mexico, Hong Kong, Burkina Faso could bring to the team. Collaboration can be a powerful equalizer in the media ecosystem when it centers the
para todos, igualizador para
that is so often overlooked by national and global media. So when people ask me what was the key to get these massive collaborations across the finish line, I say the people, the diversity of perspectives, skills, languages, geographies, even journalistic traditions, and the sense that we were all united and part of something that was bigger than ourselves. So we established from the beginning that there were no hierarchies among partners. Everyone had access to the same data and resources, and everyone was expected to help one another and to follow the same community guidelines, whether you worked for the BBC, NPR, or the gutsy Tunisian outlet Intifada, which I highly recommend. Take note, Intifada. There were no fixers in our team, but reporting partners. The word fixer, in fact, was not tolerated. And I hope we quickly agree that it should no longer have a place in journalism. We share radically, knowing all too well that any mistakes or breaches of trust could not only derail the story, but also the viability of collaboration in journalism. That's what we felt at that time that was at stake. Some of the memories I cherish the most involve colleagues doing the right thing in small and in big ways for the sake of the team. A US colleague who led the request for comment in a repressive country to protect a local partner from possible retaliation before publication. A partner who shared with us that his editors were not willing to play by the rules, thus allowing us to prevent and contain a bad situation before it happened. Here's a journalist who put the story and the collaboration ahead, above even his own employment and employer. Or a colleague living in a small country who gave up his job at the public broadcasting system to prevent a possible leak of the Panama Papers finding during the year-long research process. That colleague was Johannes Christiansen, and his Panama Papers story brought down the Prime Minister of Iceland. I am sure your collaborations are filled with similar moments of kindness, courage, and ingenuity that allow for the most impactful journalism. But we also know that collaborations are hard. Yes, we know. And that if they are managed poorly, they can become a true nightmare. We owe so much to our colleagues who take on the difficult, crucial, and often thankless job of managing our collaborations. We need more of you in journalism. You navigate from the tree to the woods and back seamlessly. You keep track and make sense of the complexity that goes into our collective research. You anticipate and manage our conflicts and disagreements. And you keep us all focused and motivated to get to the finish line. So if you are a project manager, a facilitator, or a cat herder, thank you so much for your leadership. Please know that you are essential to our profession. And I want to invite everyone in the chat to feel free to share your shout outs for any collaboration managers or facilitators that you have worked with that you think are doing an amazing job. Let's give them a really warm shout out. Feel free to share their names. I will share Mago Torres. She is a wonderful facilitator. I know I couldn't have done it without her during Panama Papers and more. I regard collaboration as one of the most significant paradigm changes in journalism of the past 50 years. It has become the new normal, but you know what an extraordinary shift of mindset and approach it took to get us to where we are today. Many of you were pioneers of these efforts and faced all kinds of skepticism and doubts. You had to work hard to convince others and your own editors that we needed to turn our practice on its head because we were missing the biggest stories of our time. You remember the raised eyebrows, the uncomfortable questions, the sheer fear in editors' faces. And then you persevered, and slowly but surely, we started to see dozens of little fires everywhere. Local collaborations, regional networks, even once fierce competitors joining forces to tackle a reporting challenge together. A couple of years ago, the California Reporting Project showed us how you approach a complex and systemic story like police misconduct as a collective. You get together with trusted colleagues and you FOIA the hell out of police departments. Then you share the documents with your 33 newsroom partners and write the stories that were hidden for too long. Still, and despite all these amazing successes, we know that there is so much more work that we need to do. And here are a few questions for us to think about this morning. Are we collaborating enough here in our own backyard in an election year when the core of our democracy, the right to vote, is systematically challenged and eroded in cities and counties across country? Are our existing reporting networks and collectives creatively and effectively countering the massive disinformation networks that flourish in our communities, amplified by social media, political parties, and talk shows? And how might we deepen our cooperation with other disciplines, human rights researchers, lawyers, artists, to make our work even more ambitious, more relevant, and I would add, more memorable. At the Pulitzer Center, where I work now, we have had the privilege in the past year to support the creation of the 1619 Teacher Network. This is a collective of teachers from dozens of school countries across the country, school districts across the country, who have come together to develop lesson plans based on the New York Times 1619 project. The network also allows these teachers to support one another amid widespread attacks and legislation that seeks to make the teaching of the history of slavery in America illegal. Big shout out to all these teachers, these brave teachers, who not only are doing really hard and important work, but that have discovered in this network and have discovered in working together a new sense of opportunity, possibility, and resilience. The challenges we face are perhaps bigger than in any recent memory. But the difference is that at this time, we journalists are better equipped to tackle them. A sense of solidarity and possibility has permeated the media ecosystem in Chicago and in California, in Texas, in New York, and in Maine. We all have gone through a lot in recent years, and yet there is this great momentum and synergy of peoples, of ideas, and methods. What is going on in our profession reminds me again of those scientists coordinating their telescopes from different corners of the earth to finally see what was unseeable. Remember, the more telescopes, the more people working together, the sharper the image of the black hole. As long as there was discipline, coordination, trust, and yes, a little bit of luck. So I am counting on this community. I am counting on your journalistic ingenuity and courage to give us a sharper image of our dwindling democracy, a deeper conversation about the enduring legacy of racism in our country, and bolder ideas on how we might create a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable media industry. Here's to hoping that we can continue to reach for the impossible and the unseeable with new tools, deeper determination, and more collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marina. I don't know how everyone feels, but I just feel that I need to take about 5 seconds just to process a little bit the emotion of these words that you have shared with us. I see that questions are coming. I'm gonna start with the first question, and we'll start moving with the ones that the audience is are starting to share in the chat. Thank you, everyone. I'm still very touched by hearing you, Marina. I'm always, you know it. I just want to point, you have been part and supported collaborations that bring together different partners with very different realities. You mentioned, for example, Hong Kong, Mexico, Burkina Faso. I wonder if you can share more about how these journalists, in your experience, what you have seen, transform or influence each other's ways of doing journalism.
Thank you so much, Mama. Thank you, everyone. I regard like these collaborations as incredible learning opportunities for everyone. When they work well, right? When we are coordinating well, when there's trust, we are in all the time. It's like we are in awe of what others bring to the table. One example that I can offer is from my recent work. During the pandemic, we had been supporting quite a bit of work in the Amazon rainforest, the destruction of the rainforest that is such an important aspect of the climate crisis. But what we realized is that we were supporting all these journalists working in isolation. On one side, the regional journalists in the Amazon and in other rainforest regions in the world. On the other hand, global media organizations that were also trying to tell this story and raising awareness about what was going on. And at the end of the day, when we talked to those journalists, they were like, none of us is getting impact. The local journalists, they said, we are doing God's work, but the impact is very limited. Our governments don't care. And ultimately, these are global supply chains. We need to have visibility elsewhere. And the global reporters, which was really nice to hear that from them, were saying, we don't want to parachute in these places. It's wrong to do that, but we also don't even know how to do it. This is the Amazon rainforest. How do we access this? How do we tell these stories? So during the pandemic, we brought together these two groups of people, the local, the regional journalists in these rainforest regions and the global journalists. We created the conditions for them to work together. We provided, and they provided digital tools that they had been using to follow the money, to follow the supply chains, to unravel the networks of corruption and showing like how these commodities travel from place one to place Z. And I think that was one of it. It has been wonderful to just watch how, these journalists have been able to increase their impact, how the local journalists are getting bylines, for example, in NBC, not only bylines, but first byline in a story done together between a Filipino journalist and a US journalist following the nickel supply chain from the depth of the Philippine rainforest to Tesla in the US. So I think when you ask me like how these journalists influence each other, is all there just waiting for them to have the opportunity to be brought together, these conditions being created for them to start collaborating, because the mindsets are already changing so much around collaboration around the world. There's a predisposition that we didn't have before. We don't have to be convincing people so much. They are ready to do it if only we can identify what are these crucial stories where just, creating those conditions can make a world of difference. And then that's not to speak of the protection advantages of working together, stories that would be incredibly dangerous for a journalist in Indonesia or in other places to tell, that now they can do it together with their colleagues because the global outlets in some ways afford them that kind of protection. It's not just me in my little town going against the mining company, but it's all my colleagues around the world at the same time revealing the same truth. So I can see just so many layers of how we are learning from one another, learning to respect everyone's skills, the linguistic assets that are brought in a team when we are collaborating across so many countries and cultures. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I just want to have a reaction of what you just shared. And in my own experience, I remember after Panama Papers, that was my big international collaboration. When people asked me, like, how was it? And the only expression that I was able to come with at the time was being there was just like window shopping the best journalism practices around the world. I know it's like maybe a very simplistic way of putting what you just shared, but it was just like how being part, how see others work, the challenges they are going through, and how that changes everything, right? Like even when you need to ask for a comment, for a reaction, for a story, in some countries you need a certain period of time, and in others have to be more thoughtful because of the danger that could represent. It's just like I love it.
Sorry to interrupt, but you got me thinking when you gave the example of the request for comment, that was a very humbling experience for us. And it also talks about another issue we wanted to discuss around power dynamics, and also sometimes moving too fast and forgetting to check with our colleagues about what are the cultural and expected practices in their own countries. So when we were going for comment, like usually what we said is like, we want to be really fair, and we want to give these subjects a lot of time. And I think we established 6 weeks. We will go in advance and we'll give them these questionnaires, and we allow them to review the questions and give their responses. And we felt, so good about that. We're being so fair and we're just doing the right thing. And then everybody in the collaboration is required to do the same. So you go to your president, and you go to the Kremlin, and you go. And our Russian colleagues, with like their wonderful, straightforward manner, like looked at us and they were like, "Are you like frankly crazy? Like, do you understand where we live and how we operate? Do you know that, the moment between you ask a question like this and you publish the actual story, is the most dangerous moment, and you will disappear, like the chances of you disappearing after asking about a $2 billion network of hidden money by people associated to, to the president is." And we just felt so, again, learning communities, learning opportunities. They were absolutely right. We were just coming out with our Western standard of how we think that journalism should work, and trying to, to impose it in a country with a very different reality. So of course we changed tracks, and we said, well, in places where this approach works, we'll use it. And in places like Russia, we will take something, a different approach. And so the decision was that the US colleagues would go a few weeks in advance and, ask those questions, as is our norm. And then the local journalists, and we would protect the local journalists and do not disclose who we're working with. And then the local journalists will go when they were ready, 3 or 4 days before the deadline, which is what they could afford to be really safe. And they also told us, and by the way, we won't send 7 pages of questions because that is frankly ridiculous. So that's
it's so interesting what experiences, and I'm sure those who are building local collaborations, they can like think about like the challenges that can be reflected in this way. I want to follow up on that, and like when sharing like how like putting together organizations of different sizes, different resources. And I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on how to embrace and value what everyone brings to the table in collaborations. And you already started mentioning like power dynamics. I wonder if you can expand a little bit more on that.
We try to be mindful that, of not reproducing existing inequities and power dynamics in our networks, being mindful of not reproducing them in our collaborations. And that is something that, again, you can't take for granted. You have to be thinking about it. And the more global the collaboration, the more diverse the group of people you are bringing, the journalistic backgrounds and experiences, the more you need to think through how to make sure that really when we say we all have a voice, we all have a seat at the table, that people really have a seat at the table. There is a risk of cliques being created where certain partners have more weight than other partners. When there are, media partners who have great influence in journalism can try to get their way or impose, guidelines or deadlines that are not what is best for the whole collaboration. So in that sense, I always think that having an organization that is organizing and facilitating the collaboration, and that in some ways is kind of neutral among many media partners, is really helpful. I know that that's not always possible to have that kind of organization coordinating, but when it exists, it's good because in the case of ICIJ or the Pulitzer Center or many other organizations that are playing these roles, the idea is that the media partners would we would all have to cede a little bit of control over, decisions. And that is hard. And that is really hard in journalism and for journalists. But that is what, is necessary for a collaboration. And we would trust that these facilitators will always keep the best, the best for the collaboration and for the team and for the story in their minds. And they would listen to everyone and ultimately make decisions that are going to advance and be for the best of the story. Things to keep an eye out on terms of equity. Think about language barriers that can exist in your team, and those language barriers can even express themselves here in the US when we are working across different newsrooms and parts of the country. Think about resources that people have. Are certain organizations being able to access really advanced corporate research databases and others don't have that kind of access? And what does that mean when it comes to the final product, when we have so many different kinds of resources? And how can we make sure that some of those that have that kind of access in some ways can share with others who don't? Let me see, I had make a security issues as well. So which, and again, that also plays out here in the US these days. So which journalists are at greater risks, which journalists can face harassment even from audiences, social media, from local politicians, legal, threats, and how can we anticipate and protect those journalists? So keeping all of these very intentional at all times, I think it helps us all really feel part that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. Keeps that trust and that morale strong.
Yeah, that's so important when we keep thinking, but it's bigger than ourselves. Thank you. I'm going to pass to some of the questions that we have in the chat. And the first one that came, how can we make it easier, from Bernardo Mota, I hope I pronounced it correctly. How can we make it easier for people like him, our local organizers who brought on the ground work to become recognized in the institutions and in their own institutions and newsrooms, so they can be credited and paid for work? I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
I am with you, Bernardo. I think that, and that's why I mentioned this a little bit in my speech, I think that we are a little bit late to recognize the importance of the role of the facilitators, project managers, and collaboration coaches. It really worries me when I see people wanting to collaborate, wanting to join this trend as a trend, without realizing what it takes to collaborate and to create that kind of inclusive and effective experience for everyone in a collaboration. And that without those project managers, without those experienced journalists that are willing to not do their own research and instead help everyone succeed, without them, it's just impossible to even start thinking about collaboration. I do see that more and more in the job boards that people are outlets are starting to hire collaboration managers, collaborative investigations editors. I just saw recently, even a post from the Washington Post along those lines, and other media outlets. So I think that little by little is sinking in, maybe by trial and error, that they are realizing that, some of their collaborations didn't go as they expected, and that in part it was because there was not a strong management, and that being an investigations editor who is in the weeds and in the rabbit holes does not equal managing the collaboration, that these are different roles, that, somebody needs to be totally in the rabbit holes and in the trenches. And then there's the collaboration manager and the project manager that needs to be in the big picture and needs to be caring and looking after the people, making sure that those that are a little bit quiet, find out what's going on with them, making sure that the sharing is strong, and so on. So it's taken us a while, and it's also a matter of resources. But what can we do? Just keep talking in conferences like this, and every time we can, about the importance of these roles in the collaboration. Let's not idealize collaboration and talk about it. Oh my goodness, yes, like that's what we do and it's so good. Let's talk about what it takes. Let's talk about, when things go wrong. Let's talk about the bad experiences that we've had when there wasn't a person at the helm, when there wasn't a person making decisions, when there wasn't a person to stop the bullies in a collaboration, when there wasn't a person to say, no, what this big media outlet says might be good for them, but it's not good for the story. Then I think that we just need to have these honest conversations. I don't have any other magic way. And one thing that I try to do from my work at the Pulitzer Center is when we are pitched collaborations, before we decide to support them, before we provide the funds and the grant, we ask them to delineate the roles, and we ask specifically about collaboration managers. And if in a few occasions we have told them, you need to redo your budget and you need to add a collaboration manager, because this is not going to work the way that you are proposing it. And sometimes that has meant that we have to give them a little bit more money to support that collaboration manager, but that's okay. Then the results are so much better.
Oh, that's so great.
So keep going, Bernardo. As I said, we need more of you. You are the superheroes.
Yeah, we have 3 questions that connect with the roles of universities and in collaborations. So I'm going to share them, and I think maybe Ron, you tell me how you want to split. But the first one from Sarah, your thoughts on how from university we can grow the next generation of collaborative journalists. Followed up by Allison, a question: what are the thoughts of the role of college and university programs in collaborative journalism? And Robin, what are the most important things to think about when a student newsroom seek to approach a collaboration with a professional organization? So all these 3 questions.
Oh my goodness, and I'm gonna forget some, so let me
okay,
start answering, and you can tell me what I forgot.
Yeah.
But I would say I've been really impressed in recent years about like how, especially several journalism schools around the country are really incorporating collaboration to the practice of their students. They are creating alliances with outlets outside of the school and outside of the state sometimes. And just recently, for example, a professor approached me last week and they said, we like what your team is doing with these collaborative networks. I have 20 graduate students. They are brilliant, they are diverse. We want to join your collaboration. What can we do? What stories do you have going that we can bring the students along? We will we will join the platforms. We will, divide the roles. So there are so many examples. There's the Howard Centers, there's Berkeley, Missouri with Sarah Shipley-Hiles, who's here in the chat, in the audience. She's leading journalists and students all the time to think about ways in which they can work together. So I think it's just presenting it again as the new normal. There are assignments and there are stories that they're going to be doing on their own. And at the end of the day, they need to have their clips where they have done, 90% of the work themselves. But think about any assignment you are creating, not only like say, do it in teams, but have them reflect and even write a little paper explaining how they are going to work in teams. Like, how is this collaboration going to what is the process going to be? And then have them share with the class at the end of the experience, not only what they found and what the story came to be, but what was their experience working together, what they learned in the process, who was the coordinator, what tools they used to share documents. I think that, just having this be more and more part of the conversation is the way to just create these mindsets in students. We had Columbia students, part of Panama Papers and other future collaborations, and those students to this day, they are leading collaborations in the newsrooms where they are working. So it's just giving them the experience, and it's really inspiring for the students to join, their more professional colleagues or their colleagues who are already in the industry, and feel again that they are treated like equals and that they are contributing to something exciting and important.
And if I can add something to that just makes me reflect in my own experience, it's just, I think that when we are working with students or see the big investigations and just like become very ambitious, collaboration doesn't have to start super big. And I think it's just also, I think that's something important to say. There are so many forms of collaboration, forming collective projects and cooperating. And I think I like honor all the different sizes in how it can be done. Conversations are going through, and you mentioned it, Marina, partnering with different types of organizations, different expertise. And I think it's not always trying to do the next Panama Papers or the next, let's embrace all the different forms that these collaborations can start from the position where we are as students, as educators, as community organizers, and how to do it together. I don't know if I'm...
that is Mago, absolutely crucial. We need to start local. We need to start with, what is closest to the experience of the students, and then, instill the methodologies and the inspiration, and then they'll go and do everything else on their own.
Yeah. So we have 3 minutes, but I don't want to leave out the Robin question. What are the most important things to think about when a student newsroom seeks to approach a collaboration with a professional news organization? I think it's just like sometimes can feel intimidated. So I don't know what you can share.
I think define, be very clear with the media outlet, what the expectations are, what is exactly that is going to be needed from the students. Try to facilitate ways in which the students can communicate, I would say, as much as possible. If there's a collaboration platform, if there's like a way in which the journalists are talking to one another, I would try to encourage to have the students, or at least some of the students, be part of those conversations on a daily basis. So not have like the professor always be like the intermediary in the conversation, where the professor is just giving them an assignment based on what the journalist told them. So make sure that they are part of the conversation. Make sure to clarify issues of credit from early on. So how is the student the students are going to be credited for their contributions? What happens when they are intensely working and reporting on a story? Maybe the students are brought to do some more basic research, but what if a student finds something really important for the overall story and ends up working closely with one of the journalists? Then how is that going to be reflected in the credits? So I think that intense communication, over communicate, and watch out for the students so they're not taken advantage of. Make sure that they are part of all the conversations from the beginning.
Yeah. We have run out of time. Marina, this has been so lovely. There are 2 questions left, and I think they're really good. So I will send them to you, and I think we can find a way that Stephanie and the team can share with the participants. It's about tools, and it's about thinking about when you want to hire a collaborations manager. So I think they're really good. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, the Center, for the invitation. Marina, always lovely to share a space with you. Thank you for our ASL interpreters too. This is lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mago. And thank you, Marina. I had goosebumps during parts of that conversation. That was one of the most powerful keynotes I think we've ever had at the Collaborative Journalism Summit. And I'm really grateful for Marina's wisdom. And I can't wait to post that on YouTube and maybe even print her words too, because what she shared this morning is something that so many people in our field need to hear.